Yep. So the next session is going to be about using the Cinder drivers outside of OpenStack. And well, first I would like to present it a little bit before we go into the discussion. I'll try to make this fast. Okay, so some time ago I started writing after a lot of people were asking for ways to use the Cinder drivers without running the Cinder service. They just wanted, they looked at Cinder, they saw the number of backends we were able to communicate with, and they wanted a way to reuse that code, but they didn't want to actually run Cinder. So I wrote a little proof of concept library called CinderLIB, which basically is able to load the Cinder drivers and provides an object-oriented abstraction on top of the calls we currently have for drivers. That's basically just a wrapper around that. So when this is really useful, it's when, for example, all the advanced things, the goodness that Cinder has, are not necessary, or when they are duplicated. Cinder has a lot of great things in the scheduling and everything, volume type, but some cases you want to use Cinder drivers and you already have your own scheduler. So you, for example, in Kubernetes, you don't want Kubernetes scheduling, Cinder scheduling, everybody's scheduling. You just want to reuse the drivers. That's one case where you have duplicated functionality. Other cases is where you just want to use to create a volume. You don't want to do fancy stuff. So that's another case when everything that gets removed here makes sense. It doesn't rip off the Cinder code and include it in the library. The library stands on its own and requires Cinder to be installed in the system within Python. So you should be able to do import Cinder before you can actually use this. How you install Cinder, it's up to you. You can install using RDO. You can install pip install directly from master. You can do however you want. That's from CinderLIB point of view, it's irrelevant, but it doesn't copy the drivers into itself. It doesn't run any Cinder services to use, so it directly loads the drivers, so no need for RabbitMQ. And as part of the metadata issue that in Cinder, we are very dependent on it, what it does is make dynamically changes a couple of things, so it can use its own metadata plugin interface here, and you can, by default, it can store things in memory, or it can do it in a database using SQL Alchemy like Cinder does. But in other cases, you can write your own metadata plugin. You want to write things in etcd, you can do it. You write your own plugin, you do it. You don't want to write a plugin to store things. You can just use the serialization of objects, and from any object in CinderLIB, you serialize it, and whenever you want to save it, for example, to a file, and at a later time, you can restore from a file. So you can use either write a plugin or just use the serialization and store things your own way. It supports normal management operation, create volume, delete volume, create a snapshot, delete the snapshot, things like that, and attach and detach operations using OSBreak. This is an example, for example, for an LVM backend, where you create the backend object and then you can operate on it, for example, to create a volume, a 5 gigabyte volume, LVM dot create volume 5. You get in return an instance of a volume object you can operate with. For example, to attach it, volume.attach will do everything, will call the initialize connection and then the OS break attach part as well. And in the end, you get a path in your system. You can connect and do whatever you want with it. And it can also be used to do other operations, like create a snapshot from that volume that you already have. You can delete it. You can do other things. That's a simple example of how the wrapper, the object-oriented wrapper, looks like. So you don't actually get the same, you don't attack directly the Cinder driver interfaces. This wraps it and changes it a little bit to make it easier to use. Applications where this can be used. Well, it can be used for Kubernetes, for Mesos, for Cloud Foundry via a CSI plugin. This is already working. You also have an Ansible role POC where you can use CinderLIB to actually create volumes via Ansible, attach them, and do that kind of thing. Overt is starting to look into using CinderLIB for the storage part. I know that Helen started looking at CinderLIB to create a Docker-specific driver for their backends. You can always create any application you want. You can use CinderLIB for any Python script that you may think of, and other cases that people may think. As I see it, there are a couple of benefits. For example, from a single driver, you get automatic support in other ecosystems by maintaining a single driver. Makes Cinder in a way more relevant because it's not only useful now in all the cases that already exist, but you get additional ones. So this is not replacing in any way the scenarios where Cinder will be wanted to be deployed as a standalone, as this is just a new addition. And from companies, this is just a new addition. And from companies, this is just a new addition. And companies, this is just a new. I sound weird. Is that how you people hear me?
That's not how we hear you.
That's exactly right.
Is it?
Oh, God.
Yeah. God, you repeat yourself a lot.
Yeah, I know.
Somebody joined and now they're gone. I don't know what that was.
Sorry.
No.
All right. From
That was
the
exciting.
from company's perspective, it would make a better investment for them if they see that developing and maintaining properly a Cinder driver gives them additional value outside of OpenStack. Right now, it's anybody wanted to use Cinder drivers would actually need to deploy Cinder, learn how to maintain Cinder, and other stuff. This way, a company having a driver for Cinder could see the benefits of being it in containers, in Ansible, in Overt, in other places, just with the same driver. And if you are certifying your driver, for example, for Red Hat, you could get a single certification process for everything instead of having 3 or 4 different ones, which is cost effective and an improvement. This is an introduction I wanted to make, and now we can actually start the discussion. I'll return the screen to Jay.
I'll accept the return.
That's a transfer, a Cinder transfer. So I wrote kind of an agenda into the Etherpad with different topics. I thought that could be one order to go, but maybe we can just jump around or however we see fit. I know that there have been a couple of concerns from people, and I try to summarize them in the Etherpad from at least the ones I got were those.
Are all the drivers in the tree included, or do you have to do anything special to it?
Most of the drivers should work as it is, but in some cases you can need some changes to CinderLIB. For example, with Solid Fire, when I started the library, John Griffith tested it, and he noticed that I was not setting the user and the tenant, or I was not setting a couple of fields, so his driver couldn't work. He pinged me, I added it, and everything else worked. In general, most of it should be working, and anything that doesn't work can be fixed.
I see some benefits as you mentioned. I agree that idea in general is pretty good and can be pretty useful, but I still don't see any benefits for the Cinder.
Well, it depends. If you tell a company, you have to choose because they are resource constrained, and they have to choose between OpenStack, Kubernetes, and whatever. You're not sure that you will win. I mean, sure, if they already have a driver and it doesn't cost them much to maintain, they will maintain it. But if they have to decide right now for a new storage or anything, which one to choose, they may decide that Cinder, it's the secondary, it's not their highest priority.
But it's not about Cinder, it's about company who want to use some block storage.
I don't follow.
So, from Cinder perspective, I don't see any benefits if CinderLIB will use Cinder drivers.
You don't see the benefit to a Cinder project,
Yes.
to a community? That's the one I'm explaining.
Yeah.
You are more likely to get people in the project if they see the benefit that it has
No.
greater benefit.
In this case, we'll have only more contributors for drivers, but not for Cinder itself.
Drivers are good thing to have.
Yeah, and that's been a constant issue anyway. That doesn't cause a newer problem.
It could though, because then there could be companies coming in, they're only interested in that driver. They don't care about the rest of Cinder.
Yeah.
They're gonna push what they want drivers to do, and who cares about
Yeah,
making sure OpenStack works.
but I think what Jay was saying is that, like, we already have that base.
Yeah.
It's nothing new, but we are more likely if you have more developers doing drivers that one of them will like to add something else. A game of numbers. That's how I see it. And I see that there are new additions there. I don't think that it actually exposes the Cinder interface, the driver interface, because it is wrapping around it and it provides a different interface.
This does.
What this
So,
does.
Gokhan, is this library the standalone library? I mean, will we all create another repository to for this project?
That's something I think I have added at some point in the agenda, whether if we are interested, it would be inside Cinder project and different repository like we have always been. That's a different topic. I think it's more a detail on how we would do it. Now I think we are mostly discussing whether we should be doing it. So the first point, that's why it's like go over the concerns and objections to see the interest, if it's interested, not interested, there is opposition, and then we will, if it's the case, we will go into the details.
I think for CSI driver, we, if we can provide such a library, that will be convenient for other storage vendors because they can use this library to create their CSI driver.
Well, the thing is that with Ember CSI, if they have a Cinder driver,
Mhm.
they
Yeah.
already have it. They
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
have
yeah,
to do any work,
Yeah, yeah,
additional
yeah.
work on top of it.
Yeah.
So you were saying, sorry, Sean, about how this really exposes our interface.
Yeah, because it's, the internal things that we do in drivers are now being, even though they're the rep, they're being exposed directly out at a different layer than where we currently provide a public contract of how we're going to behave. So,
Yeah, that's the whole point of adding to
Yeah.
OpenStack the project, so that it is, the same contract we had with the manager, we maintain it for CinderLIB. It's not a new interface with a new, I'm not suggesting let's change how the drivers behave. I'm saying the same interface contract we have with the manager, we keep it in CinderLIB, and that's it. It's not a new one, and
So-
you're not really exposing anything to the outside world if this is an additional contract we accept.
Well, that's the key, an additional contract we accept. So we are exposing a new public interface to something that Cinder does.
So,
But it's like saying, ooh, OSBreak is being used by Glance now. Is that something that we want? But
We
it's like,
release OSBrick as a library with, it's a Python library.
Yeah.
We do accept that.
OSBreak has
So-
Python API, public API, and we agree to everybody uses this API.
Mhm, yeah. But I don't see the problem in the same contract we are maintaining with our manager to maintaining with something else. It's the same. I'm not asking, we're not discussing like some,
Our manager doesn't have public API. Okay, from the Python side, technically, every Python library has some
Yeah.
public API, but from service perspective, it doesn't. So, the one of my ideas was, in real world, people doesn't care how many services they have, 2, 12, or 50, because
they care about maintaining MySQL, RabbitMQ, 3 Cinder services. They care about maintaining, not only a little bit more RAM or less RAM, is that you have a full Cinder deployment, which you have to understand.
generally, we need to have RabbitMQ at least, because we can implement open implementation or implement Ocelot driver for in-memory queue. In such way, we can get all our services without RabbitMQ, but we still need to have database. But in your proposal, you need to some plugins for store some metadata. Cinder, we can extend Cinder with new storage implementations instead of SQL schema to use some file storage. I don't know. What do you want? And in this case, you will have three services without RabbitMQ and without database, and will still provide only one Cinder API. And you can use Cinder client for each. And you can use
Okay.
Cinder client extension for the speak to make attachments.
So you're suggesting 3 Cinder services, add a new SQL Alchemy equivalent for any other storage, plus the in-memory message queuing.
Yes, we even can implement open RPC implementation and don't use RPC at all. So it could be one service And instead of RPC via message in MQP or something else, you can just call method of this services.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure if I caught all that, but are you suggesting we have the ability to configure Cinder to be more of a standalone thing where we don't need all these
Yeah.
ancillary services?
Exactly.
Yeah, that seems like a better approach to me than,
Mm-hmm.
A better approach to what?
being able to have a standalone Cinder API interface to be able to programmatically manage storage.
And we'll still have all our benefits with Cinder Manager, with scheduling. If you don't use scheduler, you can create simple filter to do volume creation in the same storage every time.
That would only cover the case of Kubernetes. That will not work for Ansible, that will not work for Overt, and probably doesn't work for other cases. The Kubernetes one, it would solve, because you can create your own operator that deploys, configures, and that's everything. But the other cases you don't get.
Which case do you mean?
Overt,
What is it?
Rev. No, do you know Rev? Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization? Okay, well, that's a thing.
Sorry.
And yeah, and you wouldn't get the Ansible. You would also need to deploy and run the services as well.
What's the issue
For
with
Ansible.
Ansible?
What?
What's the case with Ansible? Don't understand it.
Another one, the case is if you want to use Ansible to control your storage with it, that's a case where you would actually need to deploy everything. And it makes it,
OpenStack Ansible.
no, not OpenStack Ansible. Storage
I've
role
got your.
used by
I
Ansible.
understand.
Yeah,
what you
sorry.
mean, yes.
Yeah, I was maybe omitting too many words.
I understand what you mean, and I understand this case. I totally agree with you on this point. No, it's not answer, but for such cases, I really like to use OpenStack SDK.
But OpenStack SDK requires that you are running Cinder.
Yes.
That's the whole thing. That
Yeah.
to create one volume, you have to.
Yes, I do understand it, but I think it's completely different case when you need to manage some storages with Ansible and without OpenStack and without Cinder.
No, it was just one example.
Yes.
Because then any
Yes.
other thing that
Yes, I
wants
agree
to be
with you
done.
that it's a real use case. It's not covered now by Cinder.
What are you thinking for how versions would be managed where, say, we have Rocky version of CinderLIB, you make changes to the driver interface, someone installs new Cinder but has that Rocky version of CinderLIB and things don't work right, and
Well,
they come to the Cinder channel.
There are ways to do it. If we include CinderLIB within Cinder, they are tied. You get your CinderLIB and your Cinder together, and when you upgrade or update the Cinder package, you get CinderLIB as well. So it's part of the installation, and you don't get those out of sync versions. Right now, CinderLIB supports Pike, Queens, Rocky, and Master. It works with them all. But it is true that at some point, we may introduce a change that makes it, or that requires either adding additional logic to CinderLIB or breaks that compatibility across versions. But it can be resolved by making them pin, like we do with OSBreak, like we pin them all together. But yeah.
Yeah, and then with our discussion yesterday about the Cinder data service, that
That
seems like that would have a really big impact on that driver interface.
Well, most of the drivers don't require that for the basic functionality to create a volume. This is not giving you create a volume from an image. This is cloning, create volume from a snapshot, and almost I only know one driver that requires the data path to create a volume from another volume using the data plane. And then again, we also mentioned that maybe we don't need it with active-active, the data service. So,
Even if we have a separate data service, there's no reason we can't have a nice abstraction API that the driver calls that thing. If there is a separate service, cool. If not, it just does it locally like it does now. Right? That seems like a pretty simple thing to work around.
Yeah.
Kind of like one driver.
I see if, even though we cannot see clearly what are the use cases, I know you listed some, but we still, some of us or other people that doesn't know the LIB yet, in this moment don't know some applications, but if we start to fostering that or only the having that as a possibility may open the way for other people to go and apply that to their use case. So I think that the same way that Edge in the beginning, a lot of people or most of people didn't have couldn't see the application for that. Given that the trade-off for maintaining this, I would consider that it's small because the LIB is ready, and adding that to the CI doesn't seem to be something too big. I think we just should have that and see what people see, what people how many people will try to use, and so we can see in the future if people just nobody show interest, then it means that okay.
It was a waste of time.
Exactly.
Let's remove it.
Yeah.
hard to
And
take
we will be
things back.
more certain about that.
Parker, are there any backwards compatibility considerations? It's not like Brick in that you can actually create a volume or you can create a snapshot, right? So it's a public API to the operations in a way.
Right now, yes, you get the API to create volume, to clone, to create a snapshot with the methods,
Yeah.
the different methods.
So are you anticipating that over time you could need to version this or anything?
Part of it would depend on whether we pin it to Cinder versions, not because.
Yeah, I was thinking about that and wondering, does that solve that problem or not? If someone's calling into this, I mean, their software isn't necessarily pinned to the Cinder versions, right?
Mhm.
The calling framework, the application, or
Well,
whatever.
they could always check it could, CinderLIB is version as well, December, like everything else.
Yeah.
And in theory, so maybe I'm not seeing, I don't see really a problem if I'm versioning like we do with OSBreak and with anything else, this library, when you're using it, you pin your usage to a specific version. Like I use CinderLIB Queens. So I know that CinderLIB Queens has this interface, which is the one in that version. If you go to Queens, there may have been changes, just like we may introduce changes in Cinder.
So it would be backwards compatible as you do it in the sense that if I'm using Queens and I have an application using CinderLIB, at Queens, and then I don't have to change my application doing the calls when I upgrade to Rocky.
I don't.
There might be new features in Rocky that I'm not using. but you would be backwards compatible in the sense
I
that
think
my
so,
code would still work without
because
having to change it.
most of the features that are in CinderLIB are pretty basic.
Yeah,
It's not as complicated as Cinder itself.
I agree.
Cinder has a lot of stuff that it is needed for a real system. This is more like create volume has been the same forever.
Yeah,
Grown,
I agree, but
same.
I was just wondering whether we get into whether over time, if it's popular, you get a few more bells and whistles and you get into a situation where you do need to version it.
Yeah.
I mean, version it and maintain backwards compatibility.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, we liken Manila to steal from Cinder and stuff, so I was just trying to think about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe over time it could happen. But most of the time, I think in the basic functionality, we add new stuff. We don't change significantly the driver calls we make. I mean, for example, if now something I haven't added that it's in my list is the possibility to attach a snapshot, because some drivers can do that. But that's a new feature. It's not a change to the attach that we have.
Right.
So it's like,
The
okay, now,
existing attach API would remain the same. Or get extended in the way that the old calls would work.
so maybe in the future it will happen, but right now I cannot think of any case where this would have happened in the past. Like, oh yeah, if I had started this in Liberty, then I would have needed to change things. I think.
And then if there are changes in the internal private API between manager and driver,
That's
they need to be reflected in both places.
exactly.
That's I mean, I'm just thinking that's
Yeah. Yeah, that would be the case. If it is in CinderLIB, it's in Cinder. When you modify one, you modify the other. If it's in a different library, you set the changes to CinderLIB as depends on the one there. But yeah, that's the case. It could have to keep parity with the interface if we suddenly introduce something that really breaks things.
And good. One question more for me. Unfortunately, some of Cinder drivers do have access to the database. They do reads, writes. So how will it work with your proposal with CinderLIB?
Right now, I think of the drivers I have tested, only one did that. And what I did was basically monkey patch that to make it work. But I think this would be a good opportunity for something that we say 3 years ago that we should change and that nobody should be doing to actually make it happen. Like, okay, your driver fails with CinderLIB because you're accessing the database. Get the hint, change it. That case has happened to me, and I have fixed it in CinderLIB because I don't want to start touching somebody else's driver just because I want to. But that
in such case, some vendor could say, okay, you want monkey patch for that driver, I will do the same.
what we want.
In that case, everybody could follow your solution and do just monkey patching for
Oh no! The thing when it's a different project, and I want to use a specific one, is that I make a hack to make it work. If it's within Cinder, you don't make hacks. You may suggest people, hey, do you want CinderLIB to work with yours? Please update this method call and do it this other way. But when you're an external project, I cannot go to you, to your driver, and say, hey, that is making my life harder. Please fix it. It's because you say, I don't care about CinderLIB. Go up yourself. But if you're interested in it and it's in Cinder, it would improve those cases that in theory should have been fixed a long time ago. But that's a real case. Yeah, that has happened.
So I was thinking about, go ahead.
Okay, so this helps Cinder driver developers debug specific cases? Did I catch that wrong?
Do you mean if that is what we were discussing?
I got distracted and I was trying to.
No,
follow.
he was mentioning right now that there is some of our drivers have been for a long time in our tree, and they have calls directly to the database. Something that we said like 3 years ago, you should not be doing it. And we were discussing if this is really a problem, how it could be solved in CinderLIB. But from a developer's perspective, it is somewhat convenient to be able to just test things with CinderLIB, for example. I don't know.
So I was thinking about that. That certainly is for some stuff, right? But for certification of a backend or validation of a backend, are you intending eventually to exercise all the ways the manager could call into the backend? If you are, then it could be, then I could use CinderLIB to actually validate a backend.
No,
But
because
you're doing a proper subset of the calls and of the ways. to
I'm
do it.
doing the simple calls, which is what CinderLIB
So
does.
we need to make sure and communicate to backends that they're not home free and Cinder proper just because they work with CinderLIB.
Yeah, just because CinderLIB functional test pass doesn't have any meaning towards
I
Cinder.
mean, this is a communication
Yes.
issue.
Yeah.
But from the moment that he said there is no direct relationship of the version, the drivers that are in OpenStack to the drivers in CinderLIB, because, for instance, some drivers in OpenStack may ask access to the database, and in CinderLIB that would not be possible. I think it doesn't make sense to assume that certification for CinderLIB guarantees a certification for OpenStack.
But even if that issue were fixed, we would have.
But yeah, he's just saying that it could be good to make it clear in our documentation or in CinderLIB or whatever that, yeah, you pass CinderLIB functional test, but still run your Tempest test with Cinder, because this is a very small subset and you really need the Tempest test in Cinder to confirm that your driver is right.
Well, the question then is, why make it a proper subset? Why don't you have all the interfaces?
Because, for example, there are things that migration from one backend to another, that could not be CinderLIB responsibility. In our case, Cinder manager is smart, can do it. It can do scheduling. Cinder is so much more than just a couple of direct calls to the backend. Yep.
I forgot about migration.
Yeah, and retyping and a lot of stuff. Yeah.
So I was just looking at your README, so it's installing the OpenStack first and then the Cinder package.
No, you don't need, no, probably in the README, what you see is that it installs the repository for RDO. Or I made a mistake. The first. So, no.
If you look at the bare metal VM thing, it first installs the whole OpenStack queens, then it installs OpenStack Cinder.
That's just a repository.
Yeah, it's just a way to get to know where the RPMs for RDO are. So
This is not a repository, it's installing a package. Yum installs CentOS release OpenStack queens.
yeah, but that is a small package with a repository. Basically are links to where it can get the packages. It doesn't install OpenStack. Just the repositories for queens. And then it uses that to install the specific package. But you don't really need to do it this way. For bare metal, you could do pip install git plus https, github.com, OpenStack, Cinder, and it gets installed right from there. Because it just needs that the Cinder package exists in the system. It doesn't matter how you want to install. So In Ubuntu, you may want to do it some other way, in CentOS this way. If you want to work with master, you install from GitHub. Yeah, but I will improve the README to make that clear that that is only installing a repository with the references that is not doing a full installation of all the packages, right? Thanks. Yep. So I don't know if there are any more concerns, questions.
So where does maintain the list of volumes that allocated in all of them?
It has the meta. You can decide where. When you start CinderLIB, you can set up the persistent metadata plugin system, and you can store it in memory. You can store it in, like Cinder does, in a database, any SQL Alchemy supported database. For example, Ember CSI for containers has an internal plugin that can store the metadata inside Kubernetes using CRDs. So instead of requiring a database, an external etcd or anything, it just piggybacks into Kubernetes and stores everything there, which is part of the idea of having the metadata plugin system, is that depending on how you want and where you want to install, you may think, oh, in my system or in my deployment, I want data to be stored here. So you can use one of the existing ones, or you can create your own. So it's basically configurable where the data is stored. So if there are no more questions, I believe it's just a matter of deciding if people are interested in this, or if they don't care either way, or if they are completely opposed to it, I guess.
I still have some concerns, but I think if we're going to do any kind of thing to make it look like an official option, I'd like to have it entry with Cinder so that there's less of a concern about versioning, and we can easily do gate tests on it.
I would be interested in seeing use cases that do not overlap with a standalone Cinder.
The overt case, the Ansible case, they don't overlap. Overt would never use.
But cases that we have deployers and people interested in. We've seen from previous summits more people interested in a Cinder standalone.
Well, they are interested, like Ivan mentioned before when we were talking about the documentation, about using it in Kubernetes or somewhere else. It's not that they care that Cinder is a standalone. Most cases I've seen is, like you've seen, is they don't care if it's a standalone or no. They want something small in Cinder, and they want it for containers.
There's a lot of projects for the last, 4 or 5 years that various people have been working on inside of Red Hat, and they walk over and say, hey, Cinder has all these drivers. Could we use them? You've accomplished the ability to interact with all these backends, and we'd really like to be able to leverage that. And I don't think there's any shortage of people that would be eager to make use of it.
I feel so used.
And to go along with that point, I think we shouldn't underestimate how beneficial it could be to have Cinder be a standard place to create a driver for other things and have it be, important for things other than just OpenStack. I mean, it's a good opportunity to really put Cinder into a different important place than it's in right now. That seems like it could be a good thing to me.
Sean added a question earlier that we didn't really address.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, it's okay. You just typed it out here, but it caught my eye. So volumes created by your plugin, by Cinder will not have quota checks?
Of course. It will depend on the application, because that is part of the good stuff that Cinder provides. This is not trying to replace Cinder in any way.
Okay.
It's just basically, imagine instead of having 20 different SDKs for 20 different drivers, you have an abstraction that provides that, but very basic functionality.
So if somebody wants quota checks, they're gonna have to put it into their own.
Yeah, for example, in Kubernetes, the quota system is outside. You do what you're told. The CSI. That's where this could be useful when you have the smart stuff. It's outside.
And I wasn't saying we should have quota checking in Cinder, in the lib, but
That it could be a problem.
it could be a problem if we can somehow have a way that we can flag that these were created directly through the CinderLIB rather than through Cinder itself. Just so that, if someone has a smaller quota and the storage administrator goes out and sees that there's 200 Cinder volumes out there.
I see. Yeah, I see that.
Yeah.
They could go to cinder.com, get the configuration, use CinderLIB over, and do whatever they
Yeah.
want.
It could just cause some issues.
Yes.
And
Indeed.
just want to avoid people showing up in the Cinder channel and asking why Cinder's crap. And
Yeah, that's
how
a
we
very
took down
valid
the
one. Yeah. Yeah, that, because they could be using the same pool, everything the same, and since the drivers make no difference because they don't know that.
Yeah, so when you look from the storage side, it's just going to look like Cinder.
Actually,
Yep.
it's not a configuration issue because we can create drivers to ask drivers to create volume with some prefix template.
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
If operator
Yeah,
does not say this value,
Yeah, using that volume prefix could actually
Yeah, that's
be an
what I
easy way
was
to work on that.
Yeah,
thinking.
that might work.
Instead of
Yeah, but
having
maybe
volume
maybe
dash.
most drivers are not using it. Which
And
could,
I think that's the case.
Well, I think that's because no one ever sets it, so we all forget that it's even a thing that's supposed to.
but I could check to see how many drivers are actually using it, and that could be a way to solve this real problem.
Not a blocking
There are
issue,
some
but
that
just something that I think we should be aware of.
Yeah, something that needs to be addressed. Indeed.
There are some that don't use the template.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot.
There's a lot, yeah. But this could be something to keep in mind.
But there's also a lot, I think, that don't even have a name where they would put the template anyway. So that, I mean, that's a whole other piece of that.
That's a good one.
So we keep the backend credentials in plain text in a file that only cloud administrators can access in a normal Cinder context. So we don't worry too much. I mean, we talk about using Barbican someday or something to
Yes.
hide them. But we don't worry too much about it because we say it's a cloud administrator issue.
Well, they're
Maybe
maybe
just
just
be-
providing their own security here.
Pardon?
They're doing all their own security.
Yeah. So you're doing your own security. I'm just more thinking of, it's up to the application, of course, to protect and do all this stuff.
Yeah, but
And I'm just more thinking practically than about how one, there's not the same separation necessarily between administrator and user when you use the lib.
correct.
You know?
Because CinderLIB is usually not meant for an individual user. It
Right.
can be
It's meant
used
for like
an
the
application,
user is like an administrator of a
Yep.
Kubernetes.
like a CSI plugin that is configured by an administrator after all.
Right.
For overt, it would be configured by the administrator. In the end, yes, it relies on that you're an administrator doing administrative activities.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because otherwise, it's true that it's plain text. What
Right,
you're
it's more
providing.
just, the use cases you bring out is that the user of this is an administrator of another cloud or another kind of,
Of something, yeah.
of something. You wouldn't want to if you're running an OpenStack installation, you wouldn't want to just hand out CinderLIB credentials to the back ends to regular users.
Do that. But for example, when people are having troubles doing attaches and detaches, this could be a good way for them to, for example, okay, let me just create one volume, try to attach, set PDB breakpoint, see what the hell is going on in noise breaking, whatever, and it's a lot easier. You don't have to go into your Cinder deployment and actually do anything to touch. So
To
this could
exercise
help.
that path.
Yeah, this could help debug production systems, creating a new volume. You keep track of the ID, so you can delete it if you mess up. But you can actually, because we have customers having problems with attach, detach, and stuff like that, and it's really hard for them to debug anything with Cinder. Because if suddenly a timeout happens in Cinder, detaching, attaching, or anything, they have no way to pause it and see what the system looks like at that specific point in time. So there could be a way with CinderLIB to provide an administrator a path to debug a little bit more this.
I think for debug purpose, we should use different tools like more useful logging to enable. You can use
The problem,
RBGB and so on, but
no,
providing new external library,
no, I'm not saying
just
this
for
is
debugging.
the use. I'm not saying this is the use case. Saying something that at some point could be useful, like a freebie.
It sounds like it becomes unmanageable because
Well,
everybody will use
How
this
many-
library.
how many cases have you had of multipath failing, always break, not detecting devices? Because I have like 3 every week, and that's why I keep introducing fixes to always break, because I have real customers having a lot of problems, and every time I have to fix one of these, looking through the logs, it's hell, because there are a lot of information that are in the system that the SCSI doesn't do, and sometimes
That's why we need to get proper logging.
there is a point where you may need to actually check things that Cinder doesn't see. Like Cinder is not looking at UDEV rules if they are getting triggered.
Yep.
So, but at some point you may be trying to figure out why my UDEV rules are not running. Oh, that's because you're trying to get SCSI IDs from 100 RBD volumes, and that's getting stuck at your CPU is skyrocketing. I've seen a lot of weird stuff that sometimes doing things manually help debug. That's all I'm saying, that it's a possibility, not something that we would include in Cinder.
And speaking about debug, I just remember that in such case we'll have 3 places in the code that will have different attach implementation. It's Cinder Manager for migration, copy volume, and OSPREY client, local attach, and CinderLIB for attach.
But this isn't in Cinder. Why do you have more places?
3 places in the code where we do attach, and
But
in any
I
place
just,
we do new implementation of it.
but
It's just the point of
yeah, but
application.
I got lost in the 3. Migration, what is
Cinder
different?
Manager and do migration.
Yeah, but that's a normal attach and detach, right?
Yeah, sure. And in all cases are normal attach and detach, but I mean that we've got some code application and we need to think about it. If we decide to
I see what you mean.
use CinderLIB, integrate
That
CinderLIB.
we may go and change it in migration, that because there's a bug or whatever, we don't change CinderLIB, and then I see. That we may want to, if we are going to use Cinder, then make all the different libraries use the same piece of code in cinder.utils attached.
Yep.
I see what you mean. Yeah. That's something that CinderLIB was using initially. Like I was literally using that
Yeah,
state,
and
but then I
Some kind
thought,
of-
what if they change and break me? So I moved it out.
yeah, it's some kind of technical debt we should care sometimes.
And this could be a good opportunity for that. Like if we move the code from CinderLIB of the attached, use the same that we have in Cinder and make sure that everywhere in Cinder we use the same piece of code. Yep. That would be a good thing. Yep. So are we as a Cinder team interested in this or not? Ooh, not everybody at the same time. I will ask it the other way. Is anybody opposed?
There we go.
Still there.
One. Okay.
But if community decides to go forward with CinderLIB, okay,
Sean's smiling uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It might be 1.5.
That's why I ask it that way, to make people uncomfortable.
I have a question. So I think it's cool, but like,
Oh, I've heard you start that before.
yeah, it's cool.
But
I don't.
It's cool, but man,
Like right now, I don't intend to go spend a bunch of time on it, right? But like, how much of this is like your side project versus a Red Hat initiative? Is this going to show up in OpenShift as the official CSI storage thing that we need to support? Because if that's the case, I'll probably end up working on it. Or
What
I'm sad that I can't get
In
into
other
about other
cases-
stuff as
in
much
other
as I
words-
used to. If that answers your
I-
question.
is that
I didn't understand the question, sorry.
so? Like, I guess the question is, if like, what's the long-term plan for this? Is it always just going to be for troubleshooting and Ansible playbooks and stuff, or is it going to land in like official RHEL Red Hat products that we, like us vendors are going to have to support? Because that changes things a little bit.
Well,
Something we'll care about a lot more.
as you saw, there were work in progress for Ember CSI, for Ansible role, Overt is starting to work
Yeah,
on it.
that was my question though, is
You
are
can
those just
extrapolate.
side projects, or are those like official, Red Hat
But
paid
you
projects?
phrased it as, is this going to be the official openstack-cinder CSI? And I guess what I can say is that, I mean,
I don't-
he's
I don't-
totally,
Please go
he's
ahead.
on board and working on this. There's also stuff where full OpenStack is deployed with full OpenShift,
Sure, yeah.
right? And,
But the cases
That-
where it's not,
pardon?
if the places where it's not.
In the places where it's not,
There is interest in using CinderLIB for other cases through, for example, Ember CSI.
Well, so that's
There is interest,
probably-
yes.
So,
Yeah.
I don't know,
So let me ask this a different way. If we tell you no, is somebody else gonna go try to do something else that we have even less control over?
you know, that's.
Yeah,
Somebody-
yeah,
no,
that's-
Yeah,
no,
that's
no,
kind
no,
of, that's
let
kind of
me-
what I would say to Sean. You may want to keep it close.
What control?
somebody else? No.
Keep it under your
Me?
tent.
Oh, so you're gonna go do it anyway. Okay.
I'm not going to lie to you guys.
I know you were kind of
Like-
but I'm curious about the control over it. part.
Well, no, I mean, there's I don't mean control over it, but if somebody else were to go do this to fill the hole, and it's not somebody that we know and can interact with when things go wrong, that really sucks.
There's no reason that somebody else couldn't go do that,
Okay.
is the thing.
And I think it's then better that we have a known, trusted entity going down this path that's going to keep us updated and help us to understand it than it coming from somewhere else. And if there's a lot of need in Red Hat, it's going to come along eventually. So I think that more strongly informs my decision. And now everybody's quiet again.
One of the questions I had in there that was kind of related is, I put on, under the testing part, third-party CI. I don't see third-party CI running on this in any sort in the future, but are we going to do something to say whether a driver has been tested to work with CinderLIB or not, so that if CinderLIB does become a more popular thing, someone doesn't pull things down and try to run against some backend that we've never tried and have a really horrible experience and then come shouting at us about it.
Should be the opposite, right? The driver should never have to do something to work with CinderLIB.
Well, they might have to
Yeah,
not write the
in the long run,
database.
yes, but in the short run, it's like
Cinder drivers should always work right with Cinder, but that's not the case, so.
Burn.
well, for the CA part, is really trivial to run CinderLIB. You install CinderLIB, you run the functional test, whoops, done, 1 minute. So it's not a
Are we
big,
gonna push that third-party drivers do that?
yeah, no, I get what I agree with you that there should be a way to say, because when we say Cinder has these drivers, we have verified that they work. What about CinderLIB? We cannot say, oh, and CinderLIB as well, at least not in a while, let's say. So we should have, yes, a way to, I don't know how, I would have to think it, and that needs to happen because we don't want users to have like you were saying, a better experience. Like, hey, I installed Cinder, I have CinderLIB, and nothing works. It's like, yeah, but your driver doesn't work, and it's, where do I see that? Yeah.
Does your repo have any documentation for Cinder driver owners that says these are the kinds of things you need to be worried about?
Nope.
And may make this not work?
No, I actually say, hey, please, this is a simple page saying how to validate your driver steps. And if you have any problem, let me know, I will fix it.
That's true. It's probably quicker to just try it than it is to read the whole thing.
That's what I have right now. But yes, that's a problem. It's here we have to add it. Yeah, that's a real thing that would need to happen. Is find a way to get a list when we do a release, which drivers are CinderLIB supported.
So if this is coming out of the Cinder community, then there's gonna be the expectation that they can use it for any Cinder driver.
We can probably release it first as some kind of tech preview, like
Yeah, I
tech
think that would be
preview.
good.
It may not work. We have verified with this. Yeah.
Somehow market experimental or something like that with maybe overly strong wording saying that we might just get rid of this, just so that
Yeah.
no one builds unreasonable expectations about it.
Sounds right. Yeah.
And also, we should be clear that we'll totally miss the multi-tenancy case and
Miss what?
multi-tenancy. So,
Oh,
we need to be clear with it for any CinderLIB user.
CinderLIB can do multi-tenancy. You can set which tenant you want to use. It's just that there is no check of any kind. You tell me
That's
the
what I
tenant.
mean. And
okay.
Also,
Yeah, we need to set reasonable expectations of what CinderLIB can and cannot do. And everything, we may even want to list everything you're losing from Cinder to make clear that maybe you want to go with the standalone version instead of CinderLIB because this is everything you lose.
it's a good point.
I think that's a good idea because in many cases they may think CinderLIB is the solution only to find out that Cinder was giving them a lot more.
I think LV, sorry, NFS will be the exception because for NFS we need to. No, we can do NFS with
MBD.
we can mount NFS code. Okay.
Yeah, we could. It's not ideal, but it could be done. And that's something that should also be mentioned in the documentation. For NFS file system, we are using this.
Be sure
That if you don't
this
like
share users only by this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that sounds right. And I think there was something else that Sean mentioned, and maybe we didn't add it as action, because there were a bunch of things he mentioned that were. What was the other thing he said that makes a lot of sense? Oh my God.
Just marking it as experimental or something like that?
No, there was one of the first one that I noticed that I had completely missed. I don't know.
Quotas?
No, I don't think that's
The thing about wanting to put it in the repo to keep the version funding.
Yeah, probably that's, yeah, that we want it in the repo. Yeah. Into the other one. Yeah, maybe it will come back to me. Or I will check the recording and say, hey, this was it. Okay. Yeah.
It'll be somewhere in the first hour and 6 minutes.
So maybe, sorry about that.
Oh, no, I scheduled an hour for this. I knew it would take that long.
It's good.
Yeah. So we agreed that it should live with the Cinder, which is
It's going to be gate tested.
I have right now, yeah, it should be gate tested. Oh, let's say I plan on adding gate testing to LVM and Ceph and add documentation explaining others how it can be gate tested. The thing is, we can decide whether this is optional or not for each driver. Like, do you want an independent gate, which means that it takes a lot of time to have to deploy it full? You want it right after your Tempest test, you run, if they succeeded, you run CinderLIB. At the beginning, you may run it and ignore failures just to see what's going on. And then you make it like, okay, both things must run in my driver to consider a patch from merging. Like, yeah, in that case, it's a lot more efficient because it just takes like a minute, which makes sense. Probably for most vendors, having to deploy a full dev stack just to test this could be a no-go. Like, nope, I'm not doing this. But saying, okay, it seemed first they added to the gate with non-voting mode, which means if it fails, I will check the logs and see what happened. But it will not prevent any of my code from merging. And the other one, once they say, oh, it's working, it doesn't give me any error. So I make it voting, which means that both things must succeed. I think that could make sense. Like,
Makes sense to me.
Do you think you could make a Tox environment in CinderLIB where you could just run Tox something, my driver name, and have it do some functional kind of tests that way?
well, right now I have code that is able to get CinderConf, get the driver information, and run my functional test.
Cool.
Which is the one that I will be using at the gate.
That's
Because that way you don't need to configure anything.
better. Yeah.
You already testing, get it from the system and see if it works.
Cool.
So that would be part of making it easy for vendors to actually at least add it and see if it goes or not. And if it doesn't work, they can always tell me, hey, Gorka, go check why it failed.
Yeah.
And I will figure out why it's failing.
Bless you.
Pleasure. Okay, so, okay. I think for the moment, I will start working into cleaning it up a little bit and everything before I submit it to Cinder. And now that I think about the documentation, because it currently has documentation, I will reform it to make it clear, well, because right now it's outside. If it's in Cinder, there are things that I will probably want to change. But where should this live inside our documentation? Inside the developer documentation as,
Yeah, it's a
or,
little different because it's not,
yeah,
our current developer documentation is for developers wanting to develop.
Yeah,
Cinder.
exactly.
This would be developer documentation for developers that want to use this. So
Yeah.
I wonder, maybe a different section.
okay, I will look into adding a different section when I submit the code. Yeah, probably I submit it as different batches, so it doesn't, the documentation in one part, the other in another, because otherwise it could go crazy. Okay.
You should have a section that would also include the block box
Yeah,
Oh,
docs. We could figure that out later.
well, we talked about that a little bit earlier, getting install docs for other environments, standalone no-op,
Oh, yeah,
etc.
yeah, we should have that.
That obviously would go up under the installation guide.
Yeah.
But I don't know, for this, would we just add another top level section in the,
I think so.
okay. So somewhere in here,
all right.
add,
CinderLIB, whatever.
Yeah.
All right.
and then, installation instructions, usage instructions,
I already have all
warnings,
that.
etc.
Yep. Cool.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Sounds good. Do people need a break or do we want to keep going?
Yeah, quick.
Quick break, probably people just, I have been talking too much. Probably people are tired. Yep.
Okay, let's take a 15-minute break and reconvene at 3:15.
Okay.